Are you ready to discover the shocking truth about love in an age before dating apps, romantic dinners, and even the simple choice of a partner? This is the story of Lady Isolde of Montfort and the Knight Gareth of the Black Wood, a tale set against the backdrop of the High Middle Ages, where destiny was less about the heart and more about the ledger, and the greatest romance was often a carefully concealed secret. The Gilded Cage of Courtly Love. The air in the great hall of Chateau Montfort always smelled faintly of damp stone and roasted boar, a scent Lady Isolde had known since she was a child, running between the legs of armored knights. At 17, Isolde was considered a prize, a beautiful, well-educated daughter of a powerful count, her future a meticulously calculated equation of land, alliance, and progeny. Her life was not her own. It was a chess piece on a vast feudal board.
To the modern eye, the medieval concept of dating was unrecognizable, particularly in the upper echelons of society. Here, marriage was a political contract, not a declaration of love. Isolde knew her worth was tied to her dowry and her lineage. The notion of a romantic relationship leading to marriage was considered a dangerous fantasy, a threat to the stability of the noble house. Her exposure to men was severely restricted, a stark contrast to the relative freedom of the peasantry, who often courted openly in the fields or during village festivals, their unions sealed by mutual consent, often accelerated by pregnancy. Isolde lived within a gilded cage. Her interactions with potential suitors, like the much older and distinctly unappealing Baron de Valois, were carefully orchestrated meetings, chaperoned by her sharp-eyed mother, the Countess, in a public setting like the hall, where every glance and utterance was weighed. But the medieval mind, despite its rigid social structure, was not devoid of yearning. This is where the exquisite and often contradictory concept of courtly love emerged, a literary ideal that blossomed in the courts of Eleanor of Aquitaine.
Courtly love, or fin amour, was a highly stylized, non-sexual, and often illicit passion celebrated in poetry and song. The object of affection was almost always a high-born, usually married woman, and the admirer was typically a young, unmarried knight. The rules of this love were paradoxical. It was supposed to be secret, intensely emotional, and its highest expression was an act of devoted servitude and valiant deeds performed in the lady's name, not an attempt to marry her. Isolde's favorite troubadour, a charming, world-weary man named Bernard, often sang of such devotion. Bernard's songs painted a world where a knight would wear his lady's token, a veil, a glove, or a silk ribbon, into the brutal confusion of a joust or battle, his bravery fueled not by feudal loyalty, but by the distant gaze of his beloved. This was the only form of true romance Isolde was permitted to consume. She lived vicariously through the longing of fictional knights. Enter Sir Gareth of the Black Wood. He wasn't one of Isolde's official suitors. He was a knight-errant, a man of exceptional prowess in battle, but with little in the way of inherited land or title. He had entered the Count's service only a year prior, and his presence was a point of tension. His skill was undeniable, but his social standing was too low to be considered for the Count's daughter.
Gareth, however, was a devoted admirer of the ideals of courtly love. From his first glimpse of Isolde, sitting regally above the feast, he was captivated. He saw her not as a political asset, but as the perfect lady, pure, unattainable, and worthy of his life's devotion. Their courtship, if one could call it that, was a masterpiece of subtle, unspoken communication. It happened not in private chambers, but in full view of the court,
a secret language hidden in plain sight, just as the manuals of courtly love dictated. The exchange of tokens. During a hunting party, Isolde, feigning a need to adjust her saddle, let a small, intricately embroidered crimson ribbon fall to the ground. Gareth, standing guard, swiftly scooped it up. He did not return it. Instead, he fastened it discreetly inside the lining of his cuirass, breastplate, a secret emblem of his devotion. This was their first, most daring connection.
Deeds of valor. Gareth began to perform acts of exceptional bravery. In a local skirmish with a rival lord's men, he led a charge that secured victory. His valor so extreme that the Countess publicly praised him. To the court, it was loyalty. To Isolde, who saw the slight, almost imperceptible nod he offered toward her balcony, it was an offering made in her name. The language of the eyes. Their truest form of dating occurred across the vast expanse of the Great Hall. The Countess's watchful eyes made conversation impossible, but the rules of medieval etiquette were surprisingly clear on the use of nonverbal signals. Isolde would hold Gareth's gaze just a fraction of a second longer than propriety allowed, a silent promise. She would read poetry near the window, and if Gareth was in the courtyard, he would know the verses were for him. One evening, a visiting dignitary brought a beautifully bound copy of The Art of Courtly Love by Andreas Capellanos. Isolde was drawn to the passage, "No one can be bound by two loves," and "The value of love is commensurate with its difficulty of attainment." Gareth, who stood behind her as a guard, knew the text by heart. As Isolde's finger traced the words, Gareth's hand, resting casually on the hilt of his sword, mimicked the movement. A shared breath, a shared knowledge. It was more intimate than any embrace.
The scandal of the bundling board. While Isolde and Gareth navigated the rigid rules of noble secrecy, a world away, a different kind of dating was taking place amongst the common folk, particularly in more rustic villages, and later in history, in parts of rural Europe and America. This custom, which would absolutely shock a modern American audience, was called bundling. The village of Oakhaven, located on the Count's land, was home to Isolde's former wet nurse, the baker's daughter, Ilara. Ilara's courtship with Thomas, a stonemason, was a far cry from the chivalric poems. Bundling was a practical response to the problems of cold medieval homes and limited privacy. When a couple was officially courting, the man was allowed to share the woman's bed, but under the strictest conditions to ensure chastity before a formal wedding promise, often marked by the exchange of a small coin or ring, known as a wed. A historical note on bundling. This was not a universal custom, but historical records confirm its existence. The couple might be separated by a bundling board placed vertically between them in the bed, or the woman might be sewn into a sack up to her neck, or her legs tied together. It was a societal acceptance of physical intimacy for warmth and comfort without permitting full sexual intercourse, a bizarre trust exercise rooted in practicality.
Ilara and Thomas would bundle in the small one-room cottage they would one day share. They would talk for hours, fully clothed, the wooden board firm between them. Their conversations were about the practicalities of marriage, the price of a sow, the best field for flax, and the strength of the winter roof. Their love was one born of shared labor and necessity, less dramatic than Gareth's, but ultimately leading to the desired end, a socially acceptable economic union. The medieval period was riddled with such contradictions. While the church preached eternal chastity outside of marriage, the lower classes were often pragmatic. If a pregnancy occurred before the wedding, the couple were generally wed immediately, and social consequences, while present, were less ruinous than they would be for a high-born lady like Isolde. The The threat of illegitimacy was the most significant deal-breaker, but among peasants, a child born outside of wedlock could still find their place in the community. The price of true love. Isolde's father finally arranged her marriage to the Baron de Valois, a man twice her age whose land bordered the Count's. The wedding was set for the winter solstice. The political alliance was perfect, the personal devastation complete.
Gareth, upon hearing the news, plunged into a profound, almost suicidal despair. His devotion, according to the rule book of courtly love, should have remained secret, pure, and unconsummated. To interfere with the Count's plans was not only social suicide, it was treason. But Gareth was not merely a character in a poem. He loved Isolde, genuinely, fiercely. In a desperate, reckless move, he left a single item on Isolde's windowsill, a tiny, dried white rose wrapped in the crimson ribbon she had dropped. The white rose was the medieval symbol of secrecy and silence, the ultimate promise of discretion. It was a signal that he had broken the unspoken code. He wanted more than admiration. He wanted her. The next day, Gareth vanished. He left a note for the Count, requesting leave for a crusade, the ultimate, most socially acceptable grand gesture a knight could make to prove his devotion and honor. To the world, he was seeking God's favor and personal glory. In truth, he was running away, sacrificing his position for her honor.
Isolde, seeing the rose and the ribbon, understood the depth of his sacrifice. He had chosen to suffer permanent exile rather than risk her reputation or disrupt her father's political security. He was her hero, not just in song, but in life. The wedding to Baron de Valois proceeded. Isolde became the Baroness, her life cemented into a loveless arrangement. But beneath her heavy velvet gown, she wore the ribbon. Years later, Isolde received a small wooden carving in a shipment of relics from the Holy Land. It was a tiny wooden spoon, carved with an intricate design of a heart entangled with an anchor. Another historical note: love spoons. While traditionally associated with Wales, the tradition of carving wooden spoons with symbolic meanings as love tokens was found across parts of Europe. The heart symbolized love, and the anchor a desire to settle down or fidelity. It was a common, enduring folk tradition that spoke volumes where words could not.
Gareth had not died on crusade. He had settled far away, sending her one final secret token, a declaration of an undying love that existed outside of the rigid constraints of their time. Isolde lived out her marriage in luxury and political stability, eventually bearing the Baron's children. But her true heart belonged to the memory of the knight who wore her ribbon and the promise of a love that defied the laws of the land and the church. Her life was the perfect embodiment of the medieval noble paradox, a marriage of convenience and a love of the soul. The Middle Ages was an astonishing blend of the ruthlessly practical and the impossibly romantic, a time when a woman's worth was measured in acres, but a man's devotion was measured in the poetry of his silence.